I have a brand new sewing pattern that just came out, and you guessed it. It's a pair of shorts with a half elastic waist back and a zipper at the side with pockets. Oh yeah, these are gonna be your favorite new shorts this summer. And this pattern comes in sizes 0 through 38. And right here we have a size 4, and right here we have a size 24. And you can see they both fit great. And this shorts pattern is great for just about any woven fabric. It could be a rayon challis, it could be a cotton chambray, or maybe even a linen weave. You can download this pattern at the link down below in the description. And it comes in a home printer version and a large format version that you can send to a copy shop or use on your projector. So let's get started and start sewing up your favorite new pair of shorts for this summer. In addition to making some super cute shorts today, you're also gonna learn how to put in a half elastic waist back, how to add a zipper to shorts with a half elastic waist back, and how to put in some fun patch pockets with a curve. Plus, we're gonna add a ruffle at the end to the hem of the shorts. This is obviously optional though. And if you love new sewing patterns with sew-alongs and supporting indie pattern designers, make sure you check out my sewing club where you can get new sewing patterns every month. The link is down below, so I hope you check it out and have some fun with us. So the first thing you need to do before we start cutting anything out is find your size in the size chart. And if your waist and your hips don't fit in the same size on the size chart, make sure you grade your pattern. If you don't know how to do that, make sure you check out my video on that. There'll be a link down below. Once you've determined your size, printing out the pattern is super easy. It's a multi-layer colored PDF, so you can select just your size or even just a few sizes. And if you need help on that, you got it. I got a video on it down below in the description. So I have all my fabric and interfacing cut out, and when you do, you should have one back waistband with interfacing, a front waistband with interfacing. You should have 2 pocket facings with interfacing. You should have some fabric for ruffles cut out if you want to do that ruffle. You're going to have 2 back shorts, 2 pockets, and 2 front shorts. In addition, you're also going to need a regular zipper for the side seam and some elastic 2 inches wide for your back waist. And for your zipper, I recommend a 7 or a 9-inch zipper, depending on what size you're doing. Now, when you're choosing fabric for your shorts, you have a lot of options here, but I do suggest a lightweight for the shorts since they're for summer. So a nice solid linen, maybe you want a really fun print cotton. These two are so fun. And today I'm using this really fun striped cotton chambray with a yellow pocket in a linen plain weave. These shorts are going to be perfect for summer. So the first thing we want to do is attach all of our interfacing. You should have a front waistband, a back waistband, and 2 pocket facings that need interfacing. So I've got the fusing side down on the wrong side of the fabric. I've got my pressing cloth on the bottom and the top so we don't get fusible anywhere. And now we are going to steam that fusible interfacing right on. And just like that, we have our interfacing attached. And now you're gonna do that to all your other pieces. Now that everything's interfaced, it's time to serge our edges. So I'm gonna be using the serger today, but if you don't have a serger, you can use your zigzag or your overcast on your regular sewing machine. And if you wanna be a little extra, you could always add bias binding or French seams to the project as well. The important thing is that we finish our edges so that way our garment's not falling apart while we're working with it. And this will allow us to iron our seams open. Everything's gonna look nice and professional with the serge. Now I'm gonna move on to all the other pieces. So I've got all the edges nice and serged. Now that those pieces are all serged up, let's go over what we're going to start sewing together. First thing we're going to sew together are the seats. So we're going to sew the fronts together just on the seat curve and the backs together just at the seat curve. And our seam allowance here is a 1/2 inch. And for both of these sides, we're sewing right sides together. So I have my straight stitch selected with a stitch length of 2.5. And the seam allowances on this whole project are a 1/2 inch. Now I'm doing the same thing to that other seat seam, 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now that seam is sewn together, we want to iron our seams open. So whenever I say to iron your seams open, we are literally opening them up and ironing them nice and flat. And to make this easy on the curve, I'm going to be using the ham today. Very helpful ironing tool. And now our seam is nice and ironed open. So I've ironed open both of those seams, so yours should look something like this. Now we're gonna move on to those pockets. So grab your pockets, right side face up, and place your pocket facing right side face down, so the right sides are together. First thing we're gonna sew is this curved seam here, and our seam allowance is going to be 1/2 inch. Don't forget to back stitch at the beginning and follow your seam allowance. Now that we're done with this one, I'm going to do the same thing to the other one. So your pocket should look something like this with the facing on there. And now what we want to do before we clip that curve and understitch, we're going to do some clipping. So you can clip right into it, stopping just before the stitch, or you got a few options here. You can even fold it and kind of like cut out a little chunk of it, cut out like a little triangle of it. And so you're going to notice that we've got a little cut out triangle there. And then your other option is actually cutting off the seam allowance till about 1/8 of an inch away from the seam. So you've got 3 options here for trimming back the seam allowance and making it flip nice. Clips, triangles, or cutting off the seam allowance. Now that I've cut back my seam allowance, we're going to flip the facing back. And what we're going to do is sew on top of the facing. We're going to make sure that the seam allowance is facing the facing. And we're just going to add a little edge stitch here on the facing. This is going to help keep the facing to the inside of the pocket. So I have my seam allowance folded over towards the facing. And I'm just adding that little edge stitch here. Back stitch at the end, and now we're going to do the exact same thing to the other piece. So here's our nice little understitch, and you can see how it's keeping this facing nicely to the inside, and it rolls that outer fabric over towards the inside just a little bit. Now what we're going to do to both pockets is take the facing, flip it back over to the right side, and we got to make sure that we're folding it right at the seam. And then we're just going to sew the top of the facing down 1/2 inch, because that's what our seam allowance is in the project. And we're going to do this to both ends here. And it's real important to make sure you're folding it at the seam and not at your understitch. So 1/2 inch seam at the top and at the side. So I'm sewing the top first. And now onto the bottom. Now I'm going to do that same thing to the other pocket. Now that these ends are sewn, it's time to clip off the corners. So we want to clip off the excess away from the corner. So this way when we flip it, it's going to be nice and smooth. So we're going to flip the facing back to the wrong side. You're going to notice you're going to end up with a nice, crisp, beautiful finished corner there. Look at that. Our corners look great. That facing is nice. And you're going to notice it's automatically starting to turn under these edges 1/2 inch. So now we're just going to head over to the ironing board and we're going to iron up those remaining 3 sides 1/2 inch towards the wrong side. Now I have all of my remaining edges ironed towards the inside. Now what we want to do is sew down this facing because it's loose. We don't want it to pop up. So 1/4 inch away from this curved edge of the facing, I'm going to go ahead and stitch it down, and you will see a stitch on the outside and it'll act as a nice little detail out here. And I'm going to add the same thing to the other side. Now that our pockets are prepped, they're ready to attach to the shorts. So grab the front of your shorts and I'll go over exactly where to put them. So I want you to get a ruler and some sort of marking tool, and we're gonna mark down a 1/2 inch from the top waist, a few inches over from center front, and then I want you to do the same thing on the side seam, kind of where you think that pocket is going to land over here. So I've already got my blue line here chalked on about a 1/2 inch away. So we're gonna bring that over to the side. We're gonna bring our pocket up to the top, and we're gonna make sure that the pocket is about a 1/2 inch away from the side seam and a 1/2 inch away from the top. Once you have it positioned, we're gonna pin it down. Now, this is my recommendation for the pocket placement. Obviously, you can put the pocket as high or as low as you would like. You could always make the pocket bigger or smaller as well. It's really your personal preference. Now that I have it pinned down, we're going to go all the way around the sides. Just make sure you don't sew down the opening of the pocket here. I'm going to add a little edge stitch all the way around, and then I'm going to add a little top stitch, making our pocket nice and secure. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for the other pocket on the other side of the shorts. So I'm adding that little edge stitch first. Make sure you're back stitching at your beginning and ends. You want your pocket to be nice and secure. Now I'm going to add that top stitch. My top stitch is going to be 1/4 inch away from the edge. Back stitch at the end, and now you're going to do the same thing to your other pocket. Our pockets are looking great. Let's take a look at them. So our pockets are looking great with that edge stitch and top stitch, and we have our opening here for the pocket. Now we do have one last step. So we are going to sew down about 2 inches on this little part right here, so that way when we're wearing it, it doesn't like pucker out and do anything weird. So I'm going to mark down 2 inches with my ruler, so that way I know exactly where to stop. And I'm also going to add a little edge stitch. I'm going to come over 1/4 inch, and then I'm going to add that top stitch. So we just have one last spot on the pocket here to sew down. Now I'm going to do the exact same thing to the other side. Now that our pockets are completely finished, we're going to sew the back short to the front. We're going to place our shorts right sides together, and we're going to be sewing up the right hand side of the shorts, and we're also going to sew up the inseam. So this little part here down where your seat seam is, line up those seat seams there in the middle, and we're going to sew the inseam of the shorts together. First, I'm sewing up the right hand side of the shorts. Don't forget your seam allowance is a 1/2 inch. And we sew up the right hand side because we're going to put in the zipper on the left hand side. Your zippers are always on the left hand side of garments. And now I'm going to move on to that inseam. So when you're sewing the inseam, it's going to be important that your seams are ironed open and lined up. So that way everything's going to be more comfortable in your inseam. Now I want you to iron those seams open. Our shorts are really starting to come together. Now it's time to work on the waistband. So these are the pieces you need for your waistband. We have the front waistband, the back waistband, and a piece of elastic. Now I have cut my piece of elastic according to that elastic guide on the pattern. So make sure you check that out. I've also ironed my waistbands in half. So they were real big, and now I've ironed them in half. First thing we're gonna do is take the big waistband for the back, and we're just gonna sew the bottom edge together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And we're gonna make sure we have wrong sides together. So I'm sewing the waistband in half with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So you can see I've got the waistband sewn together here at the bottom with that 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now what we're going to do is mark the ends so that way we can position our elastic. So on the left-hand side of the waistband, I'm going to mark over 5/8 of an inch. And then on the right-hand side of the waistband, I'm going to mark over a 1/2 inch. Now we need to get the elastic into our tube. So I'm going to be using a safety pin to get it through the tube. So we're going to go ahead and put that on there. And now I'm going to start on the right-hand side and I'm going to pull the elastic through just until it gets to this blue chalk line here that I drew. So that way we can sew it down. So don't push it all the way through to the other side right now. Make sure it stays nice and flat. So I'm going to pull it just back to this blue line there. And now that I have it right there, I can go ahead and just sew it down. So we're securing the elastic in here by just sewing it down. So I'm just sewing right where that chalk line is, making sure I'm attaching my elastic to the waistband. Back stitching at the beginning and end. So now the elastic is nice and secure inside my waistband. I've sewn it down. Now that we have this end sewn up, we're going to keep pushing our elastic through to the other end and sew it down. So I'm just going to keep pushing this through. And then when I get to the other end here, I'm going to release the safety pin, flatten out my elastic. But I want the elastic to come back to that blue line. I don't want it all the way over here because we don't want to make our seam allowance too bulky. So very carefully, make sure you don't lose your elastic in here, but we are letting it set back some. Now I think that's a good spot. So now we're just going to sew down on that line that I drew 5/8 of an inch in from the side. So I'm just sewing right on that line that I chalked out before. And now my elastic is nice and secure. So our elastic is in the back of the waistband and it was so easy, wasn't it? So we have one last step to really make this nice and professional looking. So we want to make sure the elastic doesn't move around in here. So we're going to add some rows of stitching. I'm probably going to add 3 rows of stitching. And when we do this, we have to make sure we stretch it flat. And we're going to stitch through the elastic in both layers of the fabric. And we're going to be using just a regular old straight stitch. Stop midway through, reposition, rehold it, restretch it. Back stitch at the end, and now we're going to add another row. Now I'm going to add one more row. And now we're done stitching the elastic down. Look at how amazing that elastic looks with it sewed down. Now we're going to move on to attaching the front waistband to the back waistband. So we want to sew these 2 pieces together here because this is the right-hand side. We want to leave that left-hand side open. So what we're going to do is flip it, right sides together, but then we're going to take the other half of the waistband and we're going to flip it over on top of it, making sure that this waistband here, the elastic, is lined up right at that crease. We're going to fold it over and now we're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam. So I'm just sewing all these layers together with a 1/2 inch seam. There's that seam. So now we're going to flip it out and you can see how nice that waistband for the front is attached. So now what we want to do, just to make it easier on us for sewing, I'm just going to sew these 2 layers together down nice and flat. Now that our waistband is put together, it's time to attach it to the shorts. Now we're gonna line up the waistband to the waist of the shorts and make sure that the stretchy elastic part is going to be pinned to the back. So start pinning at one end and then work your way all the way around. It is going to be important to make sure you're lining up the side seam of the waistband with the side seam of the shorts. And then the flat waistband should line up perfectly with the flat front of the shorts. And when you're pinning the back, just make sure you stretch it out and pin it so that way everything is nice and even. What you can even do is take the elastic waistband, fold it in half, figure out where your center point is on it, and then make sure you're lining this up with your center back. So that way, when you are stretching and sewing this back section here, it's going to line up real nice. And you just gotta make sure, because the elastic isn't in your seam allowance, so you can just pull the bottom of the waistband flat and line it up with the shorts. Now that the waistband's pinned down, let's go sew it up with a 1/2 inch seam. Back stitch at the end. And let's take a look at our waistband. Our back looks like this with the 1/2 elastic waist, and then on the front with our flat front, it looks like this. I am loving these shorts. They look so good. Now we're gonna add a little top stitch because we wanna push our seam allowance down towards the shorts because we don't want this flapping around in here. So we're gonna stitch from the outside and we're gonna stitch a 1/4 inch down from the seam, making sure that we're catching the seam allowance. We are going to be stitching this down all the way around, and if you put pockets on, I want you to avoid stitching over the pocket again. It just might make it look really messy. So when you get to the pocket, stop and then start up again, stop and then start up again. So that way it's gonna keep everything nice and flat. So now I'm adding that little top stitch to the bottom of the waistband. It's on the shorts. I'm going to stitch up to the pocket, add a couple back stitches, and stop. So I'm going to skip over the pocket here. I'm going to stitch down the little midsection in between the two pockets. Now I'll pick up over here on the other side of this pocket. Now that we're done with the waistband, let's put in that zipper. And I'm going to recommend that you use an all-purpose regular zipper today, so that way it's nice and strong. I find that using an invisible zipper here can be too weak and they break often. We're gonna place right sides together and we wanna make sure we're lining up our waistband and we're gonna pin everything together. So we are going to create a seam here first because we're going to be putting in a regular centered zipper. Now that the side's pinned up, I need to know where to stop my basting stitches. So we're going to line up the zipper, the top of the zipper, all the way to the top of the waistband. Don't line up the top of the zipper tape. You want to line up the top of the zipper since we've already sewn down the waistband. And what I'm going to do is put a little mark where the end of the zipper is. So that way I know my basting stitch is going to go to here, and then my permanent stitches are going to go from this point all the way down. So I have my basting stitch on. We're going to start at the top. We're going to go all the way down to that chalk mark. I'm making sure that I follow my 1/2 inch seam allowance. And now we're at the point where I need to put my stitch length back to my regular stitch, add a few back stitches, and continue down. And now we're gonna iron that seam open. Now that our seam is ironed open, we're gonna take our zipper and we're gonna place it face down. And we're also going to unzip it when we start, and we're going to make sure that the top of our zipper, the little metal piece, is going to be at the top of our waistband. And we wanna make sure that we line up the teeth with the seam. We're gonna sew down, we're gonna zip up the zipper, sew across the bottom, and then we're gonna sew back up. So I have my zipper foot on, and again, when you're doing the regular centered zipper, make sure you're stitching in the center of the zipper tape. You don't want to be too close to the zipper teeth. When you get down to the bottom, needle in, foot up, we're gonna zip up that zipper. We're gonna continue down just a little bit more. Needle in, foot up, and turn. We're gonna sew across the bottom of the zipper tape. Over to the other side, needle in, foot up, and turn. And now we're going to sew up the zipper on the other side. And then you get up to the top, the zipper pull is gonna be in the way. Just push it over to the right, so that way you can sew straight up. Back stitch. Let's take a look. So you can see how my stitching is going down across the bottom and back up. Now let's take a look at the other side. So you can see we've got the stitching on both sides here. So we want to open up the seam because we have those basting stitches there. So now we're going to use our seam ripper and we're just going to pop open those basting stitches. Be really careful you don't cut your fabric, especially if you're using like a drapey or like rayon chalice or something. Just take your time. There we go, we've made it to the bottom. And then all those little threads, just pull them out. That's just the basting stitch you're removing. Now what we want to do is sew down these flaps. We do not want to leave these flaps here. So since our waistband's already finished, we can't like tuck it in the waistband. So all we're gonna do is take the little tab here and we're gonna fold it back so that way it's nice and flush with the top of the waistband. And then we're going to stitch from the outside. I just want you to stitch in the existing line of stitching here, just tacking down that little zipper tab. So you'll notice I have right side face up and I'm just stitching in that existing line of stitching, making sure I'm back stitching. And now I'm gonna do the same thing to the other side. Our shorts are looking so awesome. They're essentially done and you can just hem the bottom, add a rolled hem, add a single folded hem. But today we are going a little extra. We are gonna add a little ruffle to the hem. So if you wanna add a ruffle too, keep on watching and then you can see the final pair of shorts at the end. So I have my fabric cut out here for my ruffle. And if you're looking for a ruffle pattern, there isn't one. There's a little text on there that says to cut it twice as long as your leg opening. So I've got my leg folded in half and you'll notice that my ruffle doubled right now and then I'm gonna fold it again. So my ruffle is about twice as big as my leg opening. Now this can vary. You can make it super ruffled and make it 4 times. You could make it 1.5 and not add as many ruffles. I like the rule of thumb is twice as big. To add this ruffle to the bottom of the shorts, the first thing I want to do is sew the ends together. And then after I sew the ends together, I'm going to serge the end together so it's a nice clean finish. And then I'm going to serge one edge of the circle. And then on the other edge of the circle, I'm going to add a little rolled hem. Literally like the smallest little rolled hem you've ever seen. And then I'm gonna add 2 rows of basting stitches all the way around the circumference here. And then I'm gonna gather it up. And then after I gather it up, I'm gonna place it right sides together on the shorts. And then we're gonna have the cutest little ruffle on the bottom of these shorts. Look at how adorable the ruffle is at the bottom of these shorts. I even added a little edge stitch to keep the ruffle down. And now our shorts are completely finished. How adorable are these? You learned so many techniques with creating these shorts today. We went over a half elastic waistband with that beautiful stitching in it. We went over inserting a centered zipper at the side of the shorts with a half elastic waistband. We also went over how to put on these really cool patch pockets with that facing on the edge, along with how to construct a pair of shorts from start to finish, along with all of those little details like adding interfacing and tacking down the little tops of the zipper. They really make a big difference in how your garment turns out. And here are the shorts on. How fun are these for summer? And let's not forget how comfortable they are because they have that half elastic waist in the back. And they're super easy to get in and out of because they've got that zipper on the side. And don't forget, you can download this pattern. Just click on the link down below so that way you can sew right along with me. And I would love to see your shorts, so make sure you tag me in them on Instagram or send me photos. I just can't wait to see what kind of fun combinations of ruffles and fabrics that you come up with for your shorts. And you might be wondering, where did that ruffle go that I put on the bottom of these shorts? Well, I tried them on and I decided no ruffle because it made them too long, and well, I'm really short, so the proportions just weren't working for me. But I definitely want to make another pair, make the pocket a little shorter, and add that ruffle up a little higher, and then I am all in for that ruffle. And I was thinking, wouldn't a ruffle look so cute along the edge of the pocket opening? I've got to try that one out next too. Thank you so much for watching Sewing Anastasia today. If you have any questions about the shorts, leave it down below and I'll get back with you as soon as I can. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you know when all the new videos come out. And if you're already a subscriber, well, these videos are for you. Thank you so much for watching today. And let me know what other kinds of videos and patterns you would like to see down below in the comments. And don't forget, if you'd like to learn more about sewing, make sure you check out my online and in-person classes along with the online sewing club. There's links for all that down below in the description. And if you want to know what's going on in the studio right now, today, make sure you check out my Instagram stories. I'm always posting in there. Thank you so much for watching today, y'all. Bye.